It's time to fold down the sashes and complete the Easy Complete Quilt Windmill Table Topper. I don't have a completed lined quilt block back here because this is the best way to demonstrate turning under these edges, but normally this would be lined. In order to form these corners, you're going to have to fold over these two pieces towards the center. One is always going to be on the bottom and the other is going to be on the top. There's no advantage to choosing one piece of fabric versus the other. It's just your preference. That the one that's going to be on the bottom is going to remain flat. And frequently I alternate. If this part of the sash is on the bottom, generally this part of the sash will be on the upper part or the top. I'm going to zoom in on this corner and fold these sashes a more traditional way. This is not the way I recommend doing it, but it has been done for a number of years. Now imagine that edge is already finished or lined. Normally you take this edge and fold it down. It remains flat here because you're going to fold this piece on top and actually use that flat area to stitch on top, securing that piece of fabric. Then traditionally you would go ahead and fold this edge under, try and hold all those layers in place, and stitch this down. And I want you to notice right here, this little area is really a challenge when you make a beveled edge this way. I don't recommend doing that. I'm just showing you why you should not. The way I fold the beveled edges is I decide which piece is going to be the top, and that's this piece. And the first thing I do is fold the top so that the raw edges meet the fold to lines. Those are the lines that you installed when you marked your Easy Complete quilt lined back. You can put a pin here, you can put some basting tape. I usually don't do either, but I just want that piece to stay put, so I'm going to do that for now. And I want my fingers out of the way so you can see. Notice how the fabric does not fold straight across. That's because Easy Complete quilt patterns are cut in a way where there's a little angle over here that will not permit the piece to fold flat. That's a big advantage. I'm going to normally, with my finger or a tool, hold this piece of fabric in place and fold over the bottom. If you have to pin, the way to pin would be along the line marked as the stitching line. So this would be where my pin would fall if I had to pin. And when I do this, I don't use a regular straight pin. I'll use a hand sewing needle if I have to pin here, because sometimes I accidentally leave this pin in place and have to find it and pull it out. Normally that would be my finger holding that fabric in place. I fold over this way, and you'll notice when you fold over this way, you will have a nice finished clean edge, only at the top, and you'll still have all this fabric to catch underneath your stitching line as you fold the top sash in place. So now the top sash is folded, this area is folded, all the lines are clean. I'm going to flip this around the other way and show you one more thing. When I'm sewing these, and remember these edges here would be pre-finished because they'd be lined, what I do is I usually plant my needle right at the intersection of each sash, and then I take a little paint dropper tool, and if I don't like the way this looks, I usually will push one piece of fabric underneath, or I'll pull another piece of fabric, I'll tease it out with this paint dropper tool so that my beveled edge looks as smooth and beautiful as possible. Now, if one of these layers is longer than the other, I'll take my stiletto with my needle still held in place and I'll ease it underneath, evening out the appearance of that beveled edge. So there's a lot you can do. If this is too long, I will gradually ease in the parts that are too long. I try and keep my ease away from this tip and away from that edge. And if I can do that, I'm going to come out with the appearance of a very smooth beveled edge. As I prepare to sew down these sashes, the first thing I want to do is ask myself if any inserts were left out, and if they were, I install them now. So this star is an insert, and I just positioned it using safety pins, because a lot of times I'll brush my hands on the interior as I'm turning this, and it ends up cutting my fingers, and then I get a little bit of blood. So use safety pins here if you. As far as the sashes go, I don't do a lot of pinning before I go to the sewing machine. I may only pin one corner. I like to use the plant and pivot function of my sewing machine, where the needle goes into the fabric and the presser foot goes up. That's one of my favorite ways to stitch this down. I also use a stitch length of 4. I don't pin most of my sashes down, but at the very beginning I often choose to pin them. So what I do is I first decide which is going to be top and which is going to be bottom. This one's going to be bottom because I always like to lead with a folded edge. What I'll do is I'll drive a pin into my sash, holding it in place. Now remember, this is going to be the top, so I'm going to fold the top down. I'm going to hold that fold in place with my finger while I fold the bottom flat, and that is going to give me a finished edge on the bottom right here. Even if the top seems to pop out a little, that's fine. And then I'll fold the sash that's going to be on the top so it makes a nice corner, so it meets this other sash, forming a nice edge. That's all I care about. When I pin this, you'll see that this is a mess. When I begin to sew a sash, the first thing I do is find the edge I've pinned that makes such a nice corner, and I plant my sewing machine needle right there with my needle in place. So the pin represents my sewing machine needle. I'll observe this beveled edge. If it's unattractive, I try and establish why. This is crooked. That means that this sash has to be pushed in a little bit. So the sash is poking out. If you push it in already, it looks a little better. Also, this sash is a little longer along this edge than the bottom sash. That's not uncommon, and all you have to do is establish a nice looking point at the bottom, and anything that's extra you just ease in as you sew this down. So what I'm going to do, starting from my stitching point, is rearrange this beveled edge to suit my design idea. I'm going to stitch down, stitch up, pivot, and then stitch this sash.